Hello everybody, so I'm Kim, I run DarnIt workshops and I'm based in Huddersfield and I do all sorts of creative workshops around West Yorkshire but all over the country as well, as far north as Newcastle and as far down south as Devon, so all sorts of different stuff. And I've done a few sessions on here before, but today's is a nice festive one. So we're going to be doing some Tealight Towns. So it's a nice way to upcycle jars and have a bit of time just to kind of doodle. Because who doesn't love a bit of a doodle? So you can do things like this where it's just a lot of drawing, or my favourite thing to do is to get vintage photos and turn it into something like this. So because I've got my lights on at the moment, it's probably not easy to see this, but there's a load of windows cut out here. So I've got a little tea light in there, and when it's dark, all of these windows flicker, so it looks really, really nice. So what I'll do now is I'll turn my camera around so I can show you what we're doing and show you all of the bits that you're going to need. So just bear with one moment so I can turn this around, and do feel free to comment as well, ask any questions and tell me where you're from, what you're making things with and all sorts. So if I turn this around now, so we've got a few different versions here. So these are all with vintage photos and bits of tracing paper and all sorts of bits and bobs. So what I would recommend having ready for this is a jam jar. Jam jars with nice smooth sides are kind of the best to work with. And then I'd recommend, if you've got some vintage photos that you can use, those are perfect. Things with lots of buildings, mountains and stuff like that work really well. Just going to turn the other light on. There we go. So we've got a bit more even lighting here. And as well, we're going to need some paint pens. So these are Posca pens. If you've not worked with Posca pens before, they're absolutely amazing. They're really fun to draw with. They draw on paper, on glass, wood, ceramics, all sorts. But any kind of paint or chalk pen will do. So I've got a few different brands with me just here. So I'm just going to turn to my laptop for a moment so that I can see if there's any comments coming up, because it's always good to keep an eye on that. So you'll need those, some scissors, a cutting mat, and a craft knife would be really, really good. Oh, good morning, Rita and Irene. Oh, good afternoon even. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for tuning in. So you can either use jars that are plain, or these ones are ones that I've used some frosting spray on. So with that, it's something you can buy really, really easily from Wilko's, B&Q, all sorts of places like that. And what you do with that is just, I never do anything that involves spraying on a live video, because that would mean doing it in my house, and anything like this you should really do outside with a lot of ventilation, because it does have a lot of VOCs. So you do this outside and just spray it from a distance and just go ch 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 to get that really, really nice frosted coating. So that's just another way. So the difference between them is kind of between those two. So you've got this nice frosted effect, or this one's got a frosted background as well. And the main difference is that when you light it up, with these ones, when they're frosted, you have to put your photos and drawings on the outside so you can actually see them. Whereas if you have a clear glass, you can put them inside, and it just means that they kind of stick together a little bit better, because sometimes find, it's not showing up so much on this one, but on here, this photo is trying to pull away from the side a little bit, and it's just because it's a flat photo on a curved surface. So that's just the only difference. I'll just get that tea light out so it's not rumbling around. So as well, if you're doing ones where you're putting the bits inside, obviously use one of those little battery operated tea lights rather than a real tea light. Whereas one like this, where everything's on the outside, you can have a real tea light, which is always nice. Let's get that one out as well. So what we do to start, I clear the decks a little bit. Is getting a cutting mat. So all of these photos, I'm sure lots of people have photos just sat about in their house. And these are my partner's grandparents, and they were big travellers. And when we sadly lost them, there were all of these photos and no one knew quite what to do with them. So I was given them and asked that I could do some crafts with them, just so that they'd get used and they wouldn't go in the bin. So ones like this, where it's kind of Italy, southern France, all things like that, where it's got all of the lovely like mountains in the background, works really, really well. And you can be as precise as you like with it. So I tend to, if there's a mountain in the background, I'll cut it out, but often if it's one like that, once you've cut it out, it doesn't actually look like much underneath it. So that just looks like a bit of sky. So if that happens, I would cut it back to the more obvious mountains there. And then we can add some of our own drawn mountains into it. There we go. And I tend to, if there's any bit of road or anything like that at the bottom, I'd get rid of it. Because if we're putting it on a jar like this and we want to have quite a lot of different layers of things, that's just going to take up space. Whereas getting rid of that and having more buildings is a really good way to work. If we get those bits out of the way, then you get a craft knife, and obviously be very, very careful with the craft knife. Make sure that your fingers are out of the way. And then I tend to, if there's any bigger windows, chop them out. And I tend to find that a Scalpel craft knife is better for this than like a Stanley knife. So I'd never go for all of these teeny tiny ones here. I wouldn't take out every single one, but just a couple of them. Because with these, you can chop around them and then use the blade of your knife to pick it out. Like that. And then if I got one of my little tea lights, oh, I picked up one that doesn't work. And if that was behind it, obviously not easy to see when I've got lots of lights on it, but you can see it coming through in a really nice way. So has anyone been doing any lovely Christmas crafting at the moment? And then you can build it up into like a different bit of scenery. So if I put this one next to it, because that's a very dense city against something that's quite sparse, that's not going to sit right. So we want to go with something that's a similar kind of size building. So something like this. So I believe this is near Venice. It's one of the little islands. So we could have that or something like that. Again, because that one's very dark in comparison, you probably wouldn't go for that. But this one works well because it's a similar size. It's got the mountains in the background, so it could continue quite nicely. So I'll cut out this and then we'll stick this down and do a little bit of doodling. And I'm going to cut off a little bit of water at the bottom. And see how those would slot together. So because the mountain goes up there, probably want it to sit there instead. But you can always do it where you can change the shape of the mountain as well. So we've got a bit of a peak there. And then that just sits next to there a little bit better. And I always try and overlap them a bit as well. And if you look at the size of your jar, so I'm going to go for this one. So you want to work out how many you have to do to wrap around it. So those two would work quite well. But if I was doing a really big wide jar, you might want to go with a few more and kind of layer them up a little bit. And you could always have it so that you had something else behind this as well. But what I'm going to do now is get some paper. Because if you have some paper behind it, you just get these different levels of transparency. So that when you've got a tea light in it, and it's kind of like a little bit dark in an evening, you get all of these different levels of light coming through. It just looks really pretty. So I would use double-sided sticky tape for this, just because it's a lot stronger than glue. And then if you put this on here, just on the bottom of it, and if it overlaps a little bit, it's not the biggest problem. and then stick it down to the bottom here, like that. And then work out where this one's going to sit next to it. So because we've got a little bit going up here, I'm going to turn that into another little mountain peak so that it sits a little bit better together. And then this one, I'm going to slot ever so slightly behind it like that. It's one of those workshops that I've done this with all sorts of different age groups. I've been doing it quite a lot recently with a Huddersfield-based charity that does different groups to reduce loneliness in older generations. I was a bit worried that they'd look at this and be like, oh, it's a bit silly, but they all got really, really into it. So then with the background, I tend to add on to this and create different bits of scenery behind. So you see how here I've got all of these mountains. So we've got some of them there. You could add your own little buildings in as well. So I'm doing this where I kind of freehand draw it. I've had a few recently as well where people have done this kind of thing, where instead of sticking the photos on, they put them behind like this and then draw directly onto the glass. I say, picking up a pen, it doesn't seem to work. So if anyone's used paint pens before, then you'll know that every so often they dry out, and what you do is push the nib down and then it releases a little bit more ink. So whenever I do this workshop, I always have loads of people saying to me like, oh, the pens are broken. It's like, no, push the nib down. It'll work perfectly. So I've gone for a pen here that's quite broad, so it's not working as well as it should do. If you had a finer one, you get a slightly better effect with it. I couldn't find my finer pens earlier. So you can always do that instead, where you trace them and then you could build it up with loads of different buildings if you're not so keen on freehand drawing. And if you're just wanting to do a little Christmassy scene instead, I had one recently where someone was convinced they couldn't draw and they were getting really stressed about drawing a Christmas tree. But really, to do some nice stylized Christmas trees, all you have to do is some triangles like this and then just put different patterns in them. So you could do one like this where it's all different triangles. So like that sort of thing. You could do all sorts of different lines, just different V shapes on it. And then you get this really lovely look to it. Now I always think if you're just doodling rather than adding any photos on, it's good to have a really like kind of strong difference between the clear areas and the coloured in areas. So if you have a load of really black sections, it just means that again, when that light's coming through, you'll get some really lovely kind of silhouettes if you put it next to a wall. But that's what we were doing here. So you could always add in some nice mountains up here. So kind of continuing on from these bits. And you can always colour them in, you can leave them blank, you can do all sorts really. And you can add in your own buildings as well. So if you wanted to have like a little mountain house up in the hills, you could put one of those in. So you don't really have to worry about the scale too much because it's more about it being fun than being realistic. So you could have a big old house up in the hills. I'm going to colour this whole bit in. And these pens do just flow like paint, but they're really nice and easy to control. So you don't have to do loads of details. Add in some different buildings up here too. Very much wishing I grabbed the thinner pens earlier. Let's see what this other black one's like. Think, oh no, this one is thicker again. Let's try this one. If this works, that might, there we go. So this isn't a paint pen, This is just one I've got in the pot of pens next to me. So it should be a little bit easier to get some detail in there. You could always add some spires to it. Just make it into a little Christmas town. And it's just nice to have a bit of time to doodle to yourself, because so many people have been told at some point in their lives that they can't draw. And it's not even about whether you're good at drawing or not. It's more about just doing it for the fun of it. So if I add another little house over here. It's always the thing, whenever I do a live version like this, I forget how to draw things. So let's do a really simple little one. We can always add more detail to that later. And then cut that layer out. And then we're going to add a layer of tracing paper behind it. And I've got another session coming up soon. It's again a jam jar based one, but next time it will be making snow globes out of the jam jar, which is again one of those ones where I started doing it as a session for children a good few years ago, and then I just found adults wanted to do it. And it's just a really good session again to just do a nice bit of mindful crafting just for yourself. I'm just going to cut the last bits of this out with my craft knife just to make it a bit more exact. I'm always amazed seeing what people come up with as well with this, because like the last one that I did of these in person, I don't know if anyone watching knows Huddersfield, but we've got this our kind of landmark is this tower called Victoria Tower, and it's generally known as Castle Hill because that's the name of the hill, and it looks over Huddersfield, so it's really kind of iconic for around here. We've got that, and we've got Emily Moore Mast, and someone did a beautiful drawing of a kind of silhouette of those, again saying the whole time that she couldn't draw, but it was absolutely beautiful. Now if I get some tracing paper, because again with tracing paper it just creates another layer of transparency. So if I turn these off for a moment, get one of these. Again, picking up the one that doesn't work, I need to put that one to the side. I hold this behind. You can see down here at the moment it's not really coming through. Then up here you get more bits showing through. And if I cut more holes into this, then it'll be even more obvious. So again, we'd stick this down at the bottom. And I've got one of these, if anyone is watching in Huddersfield, I've got one of these coming up on Friday, I believe, at 10:30 at one of the local libraries. So I've had everyone I know collecting me jam jars for all of these ones that I've been doing recently. So my house is just full of jam jars. And if we add that one on, and then it can add extra layers behind that. And can always add more details to this too. And because it's only been taped at the bottom, you can always use this to fill in those bits, because it's always frustrating if it's taped at the top and then you try and do this and then you've got a little gap going on. And if there's any bits where the colour's been cut off there, can fill those in a bit. And you don't just have to stick to one colour as well. I've realised I've gone all very monochrome today. But you can fill in areas with all sorts. So you could add bits of white to it, bits of gold, because these paint pens come in such lovely colours. So you could always kind of highlight different bits as well. So you could add some little snow-capped peaks to the top of things like that. So is anyone watching this and trying it at the same time, or are people watching it to try it later? So then all of these bits that don't have any colour on, they'll show through really, really well. And then once it's on a jar, you just get all different bits. So then if I take out some more bits down here, like here, if I take out a window there, normally I would go for bigger buildings so that you can take out windows much more easily, like that sort of thing. So I've given myself a real job to do here. And has anyone been doing any other virtual village hall things today or this week? Because they always have so many good things going on. Do that with scissors rather than a craft knife. And if anyone has worked with Posca pens before, what have you used them for? You can use them for so much. I've got a few friends who do beautiful like window decorating things, and they work absolutely beautifully for that. Then you can kind of go over any bits that you want to fill in a little more. One thing that you have to be careful of with paint pens and chalk pens is that they take a little while to dry. So these white bits here, because they're shiny, they're still wet, so you wouldn't go over them yet. And normally I would put a piece of paper underneath when I'm doing this kind of thing, because if not, it does end up all over your work surface. So then, it's definitely not my best work, but that happens sometimes, doesn't it? So then you can put it onto your jar. And if it overlaps a bit, then it's quite nice because you get kind of a different level of mounting. So if I'd done a few more going around here, we would have got an extra little bit of height going on. So I'm going to take that bit off because I don't need it. Put a little bit of double-sided sticky tape there. Then fold it around from the other way to begin with, and then line up those bottom bits, and then you've got a nice jar going on. And you can always do a few more doodles on top of it as well. So you could add in extra mountains behind it. Could put in some little birds in the background. A moon, some stars. You could always, if you get a white pen, you could add in some clouds at the top. They're just so nice to draw on glass with because they just go on so smoothly. And if you push the nib down and get a little bit of extra ink out, it's easier to fill in an area, but don't do it too much because then you end up with just a massive drippy bit. My favourite is when you've got a really chunky white pen like this, just add on bits of snow like that. So on here, because it's on clear glass, it's not looking that obvious, but on this frosted one over here, so this is when I've got a finer pen and you can add more details to it. It's really fun to just add all of these in. So again, you can do outlines in black, fill it in white. And then, so if I show you on this one, turn the lights off. And then on here, because there we go. So the bit at the top is the kind of brightest bit where you're getting all of those details. Now if I push it down to there, again, it might not show up on here just because I do still have the big light on. That little door there is showing a bit of a flicker through. You just get different areas lighting up. But again, tricky when it's not completely dark, but when it's really dark, looks absolutely gorgeous. So if you put a light in it, and so like when I looked at that, I could see there was some very non-filled in bits just there. So you can always go over them again, make any lines bolder. Add some extra colours. So I always quite like going with this kind of tealy, foresty green type thing, just to add a little bit of difference. And you can do it where you could just make it completely doodles as well. So even just doing different dots like this works really well. And just those kind of snowflakes, nice little trees. Then again, if you added in different colours like that, once it's all dry, you can always draw on top of some sections that you've already filled in. So we would absolutely love to see, if you're doing any of these at home, what they look like in the end. And sometimes keeping it simpler is a really nice way to go. But just making sure, if you're doing anything like this and you're colouring on top of it afterwards, make sure it's completely dried out first, or you end up with a bit of a smudgy mess. Oh, hi Kath, thank you so much for asking. So making them frosted is, so you get literally a can of frosting spray, and you always make sure that you do it outside because it's got quite a lot of VOCs in it, so it's not kind on your lungs, but you just from a distance spray it. And I tend to put it on like an outdoor table or something and spray around it, and generally it takes quite a few different sprays for it to get there, but then it looks really, really nice in the end. And like on this one, I've got an area where it's more clear and more coloured in, so this area would naturally just let less light through. So there's always all sorts of different things you can do with it. Like this one over here, we've got a little bit of chimney smoke. You can always fill sections like that in. And another option, if you didn't want to do it on a jar, you could always do it Where was the one I just did? Completely destroying it. So you can always do it as well, where you just curl it in on itself like this. So it kind of overlaps quite a lot. And then if you get a little tea light, you can just put it in the middle like that. And then it's just a different effect again. And I think that is pretty much our time. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. You can find me on all of the things: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest at DarnIt Workshops. So that's DARNIT Workshops. And I'll be back soon with a snow globe workshop. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Have a really lovely day. All right, bye.